"It's a father-daughter dance. And I'm alone," said the little girl, crying to the millionaire. He then did something that no one would have imagined. "Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story." The autumn leaves crunched beneath Richard Montgomery's handmade Italian leather shoes as he walked through Riverside Park, his usual evening routine after another grueling day of board meetings and corporate decisions. At 40, Rick had everything money could buy: a mansion in the hills overlooking the city, a fleet of luxury cars sitting in his 8-car garage, and a business empire that spanned 3 continents. Yet as he walked the familiar path through the park, something felt hollow, like an echo in an empty cathedral. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. This was his sanctuary, the one place where he could escape the constant demands of Montgomery Industries, the telecommunications giant he'd built from nothing after his father's death. Here among the towering oaks and quiet ponds, he could almost forget the loneliness that had become his constant companion. As he rounded the bend near the old oak tree where he usually sat to check his evening emails, something unusual caught his eye. A small figure sat hunched on the weathered wooden bench, golden curls catching the last rays of sunlight like spun gold. The child was wearing the most beautiful pale pink dress he'd ever seen, with delicate lace trim and tiny pearl buttons that sparkled in the fading light. But despite the exquisite outfit, her small shoulders shook with quiet, heartbreaking sobs. Rick slowed his pace, his businessman's instincts warring with an unexpected tug at his heart. He hadn't spoken to a child in. How long had it been? Years, maybe decades. His world was filled with adults, executives, lawyers, accountants, all speaking in numbers and contracts. But something about this little girl's overwhelming sadness made him stop dead in his tracks. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said softly, approaching the bench with the same caution he'd use with a frightened animal. His voice, usually commanding in boardrooms, became gentle and uncertain. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" The little girl looked up, revealing tear-stained cheeks and the most striking blue eyes he'd ever seen, eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, and the pain in her expression was far too mature for someone so young. Those eyes reminded him of something, though he couldn't quite place what. "I'm Emma," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. "And no, I'm not okay. I don't think I'll ever be okay." Rick felt his heart clench at the despair in her tiny voice. He glanced around the park, expecting to see frantic parents searching for their lost child, but the area was eerily quiet. "Emma, that's a beautiful name," he said, sitting down beside her while maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm Rick. Where are your parents, sweetheart? Are you lost? Should I call someone?" Emma shook her head vigorously, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Mommy's at work. She's always at work. She doesn't know I'm here." She hiccuped through her sobs. "I walked here from school because I couldn't go home. I just couldn't." "Why couldn't you go home?" "Why?" Rick asked gently, his protective instincts kicking in despite himself. "Because tomorrow is the father-daughter dance at school," Emma said, her voice breaking with each word. "All the other girls get to dance with their daddies. Sarah's daddy is teaching her the waltz. Jessica's daddy bought her new shoes just for dancing, but She broke down completely, her small body shaking with the force of her grief. "I don't have a daddy to dance with. I'm all alone. I'll be the only one sitting by herself while everyone else dances." The words hit Rick like a physical blow to the chest. He stared at this beautiful, broken little girl in her perfect dress, a dress that had obviously been chosen with such care and hope. And something shifted deep in his chest. A wall he'd built around his heart years ago began to crack. "Emma," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't felt in years. "What if I told you that you don't have to be alone tomorrow? What if I told you that sometimes the most important families aren't the ones we're born into, but the ones we choose?" Emma's eyes widened, hope flickering like a candle flame in the darkness. "What do you mean, Mr. Rick?" Rick smiled, and for the first time in years it reached his eyes. The smile transformed his usually stern face, making him look younger, more vulnerable. "Would you like me to be your dance partner tomorrow? I may not be your daddy, but I'd be honored to dance with such a brave, beautiful little girl." Emma's mouth fell open in shock. You would do that? For me, but you don't even know me." "Sometimes," Rick said, surprising himself with his words, "the heart knows what the mind doesn't understand yet." But as the words left his mouth, as he watched hope bloom in Emma's tear-stained face, Rick had no idea that this simple act of kindness would unravel a mystery 28 years in the making. He had no idea that the little girl sitting beside him held the key to healing a wound he thought had destroyed him forever. And he certainly had no idea that by tomorrow night, everything he thought he knew about his life would be turned completely upside down. The small apartment building stood in stark contrast to Rick's usual surroundings as he walked Emma up the narrow stairs to the 3rd floor. The walls were painted a faded green that had probably once been cheerful, and the carpet beneath their feet was worn thin from years of foot traffic. Rick noticed the peeling paint near the stairwell and the flickering hallway light that cast eerie shadows on the walls. Emma's tiny hand in his felt so fragile, so trusting, that it made his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. "Mommy works really hard," Emma whispered, as they reached apartment 3B, her voice filled with the kind of mature understanding that no 6-year-old should possess. "She cleans offices at night after I go to bed, and then she works at the diner during the day while I'm at school. She says we'll have a better place soon, but—" She shrugged with the resignation of a child who'd learned not to hope too much, and Rick felt his heart break a little more. The door was painted blue, though the color was chipped and faded. A small wreath made of paper flowers hung from a nail, clearly Emma's handiwork. Rick could hear movement inside, and the sound of a television playing softly. He knocked gently on the door, trying to imagine what Emma's mother would be like. Footsteps approached, and he heard a woman's voice call out, "Emma, baby, is that you? You're supposed to call me when you get home from school." The door opened, revealing a woman in her late 20s, with tired blue eyes and blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was beautiful despite the exhaustion etched in her features, with high cheekbones and full lips that looked like they'd once smiled more often. She wore a simple waitress uniform, a pink dress with a white apron that had seen better days. When she saw Rick standing beside her daughter, her face went pale and her hand flew to her throat. "Emma, where have you been?" "I was terrified when the school called and said you never made it to aftercare," she said, pulling Emma into a fierce hug. Her eyes never left Rick's face, and there was something in her expression, recognition, fear, hope. "And who is this gentleman?" "This is Mr. Rick, Mommy," Emma said excitedly, her earlier sadness forgotten in the joy of introducing her new friend. "He found me crying in the park, and he's going to dance with me tomorrow at the father-daughter dance. Isn't that wonderful?" The woman's face went from pale to ashen, and Rick saw her legs shake slightly as if she might collapse. "I'm sorry, sir, but my daughter shouldn't be talking to strangers. Emma, go to your room right now." "But, Mommy, Mr. Rick is nice. He said he'd teach me to waltz and everything." "Now, Emma, please!" Rick watched the interaction with growing confusion. There was something about this woman that felt familiar, like a song he'd heard long ago but couldn't quite remember. The way she moved, the cadence of her voice, even the way she protected Emma with her body, it all triggered something deep in his memory. "Ma'am, I'm Rick Montgomery," he said, extending his hand. "I own Montgomery Industries. I found Emma crying in Riverside Park, and when she told me about the dance tomorrow, I just wanted to help. I hope I didn't overstep." The woman's hand flew to her mouth, and she stepped backward, as if she'd been slapped. "Montgomery," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Rick Montgomery. Oh my God." "Yes. Do we know each other?" Rick asked, studying her face more intently. There was something about her eyes, the shape of her nose, the way she held her head when she was thinking. For a long moment, she just stared at him, her eyes filling with tears. Then, as if making a monumental decision that would change everything, she stepped back and opened the door wider. "I'm Sarah Collins," she said, her voice shaking, "but I used to be Sarah Mitchell. Please come in, we need to talk." As Rick entered the modest apartment, his mind reeled. Sarah Mitchell. The name echoed through his memory like a ghost from another life. He had no idea that the conversation they were about to have would change everything. He thought he knew about his past, his present, and his future. The apartment was small but clean, filled with Emma's artwork taped to the walls, and the scent of vanilla candles that couldn't quite mask the smell of yesterday's dinner. Rick saw finger paintings of rainbows and stick figure families, crayon drawings of houses with too many windows, and dogs with purple fur. A small Christmas tree sat in the corner, decorated with handmade ornaments and a few store-bought ones that looked like they'd been purchased at a dollar store. Sarah gestured for Rick to sit on the worn couch, a brown sectional that had clearly seen better days, but was covered with a colorful throw blanket that Emma had probably chosen. She disappeared into the kitchen, and Rick could hear her moving around, the clink of dishes and the sound of running water. When she returned, she carried 2 cups of coffee in mismatched mugs, her hands trembling so badly that the liquid sloshed over the sides. "I'm sorry," she said, setting the cups down on the coffee table. I never thought I'd see you again. I dreamed about it, wondered what I'd say, but I never actually believed it would happen." "You really don't remember me, do you?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She sat across from him, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug as if drawing warmth from it. Rick studied her face, searching for something that would trigger a memory. The bone structure was familiar, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, the little scar above her left eyebrow that he was sure he'd seen before. "I'm sorry, I don't. Should I?" Sarah's hands trembled as she set down her cup. 28 years ago, you were in college, Stanford University. You were studying business, and I was studying education, hoping to become a teacher. We met at a coffee shop near campus. Do you remember Café Luna? The color drained from Rick's face as fragments of memory began to surface like pieces of a puzzle floating to the surface of dark water. A young woman with bright eyes and infectious laughter, late night studying together in the library, walks through campus holding hands, a love so intense it felt like it could conquer the world. Sarah Mitchell. I changed my name after. She couldn't finish the sentence, but Rick understood. After I left for Europe, Rick whispered, the full weight of his past crashing down on him like a tidal wave. Sarah, I tried to find you when I came back 2 years later. I went to your apartment, your school, even tracked down your old roommate. No one knew where you'd gone. It was like you'd vanished. I had to leave, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. When you left for that business opportunity in London, I discovered I was pregnant. I tried to reach you, but your phone was disconnected. I wrote letters to the address you'd given me, but they came back stamped, "Return to sender." I even tried calling your parents, but they said you'd told them not to give out your contact information. Rick felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. Pregnant? But we were so careful. Not careful enough, apparently, Sarah said with a bitter laugh. I was 19, scared and alone. My parents disowned me when I told them. They said I was a disgrace to the family name. I had no money, no support, no way to finish school. I did what I thought was best at the time. What happened to the baby? Rick asked, though part of him already knew the answer and was terrified to hear it confirmed. Sarah's voice broke. I gave birth to a beautiful little girl on March 15th. She had your eyes, Rick. The same green eyes you have, the same determined little chin. I named her Emma Rose, and for 3 months I tried to make it work. But I was working 3 jobs just to survive, sleeping in shelters, trying to finish school. I couldn't provide for her the way she deserved. So you gave her up for adoption, Rick said quietly. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, Sarah sobbed. I held her one last time, memorized every detail of her face, and then I signed the papers. I thought I was giving her a better life. Rick's world tilted on its axis. What was her full name? Emma Rose Montgomery. I wanted her to have part of you, even if she'd never know you, even if you'd never know her. As the truth hit him like a lightning bolt, Rick realized that the little girl in the pink dress, the child who'd captured his heart in an instant, was his own daughter. The daughter he'd never known existed. The next morning, Rick arrived at Emma's school with a heart full of nervous energy and a head spinning with revelations that had kept him awake all night. He'd spent hours talking with Sarah, filling in the gaps of 28 years of separation, learning about the struggles she'd faced and the miracle that had eventually brought Emma back to her. The adoption agency had eventually returned Emma to Sarah when she'd gotten back on her feet and proven she could provide a stable home. But by then, Rick had already started Montgomery Industries, building walls around his heart to protect himself from the pain of losing the love of his life. Washington Elementary School was a modest brick building, with cheerful yellow doors and children's artwork displayed in every window. Rick had attended private schools his entire life, places with manicured lawns and marble hallways. This school had heart instead of luxury, and as he walked through the corridors lined with lockers decorated with stickers and family photos, he felt something he'd never experienced before, a sense of belonging. "Mr. Rick, you came." Emma's voice rang out across the hallway, and Rick saw her running toward him in a beautiful white dress with tiny blue flowers. Her hair was braided with ribbons, and her face was bright with excitement. She threw herself into his arms, and Rick felt something inside him heal that he didn't even know was broken. "I promised I would, didn't I?" he said, lifting her up and spinning her around. Several other children stopped to watch, and Rick noticed their fathers looking at him with curiosity. "Are you ready for our dance, sweetheart?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, then grew serious. "Mr. Rick, I have something important to tell you. Mommy and I talked for a long time last night after you left. She told me about when she was young and knew a man named Rick Montgomery. She said you might be someone very special to me. She said you might be." She whispered the last word like it was a secret. "My daddy." Rick's eyes filled with tears. "How do you feel about that, sweetheart?" Emma's face lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. "I always wished for a daddy who would love me and dance with me and read me stories. And yesterday, when you sat with me on the bench and didn't walk away when I was crying, I felt like maybe my wish was coming true." "Emma," Rick said, kneeling down to her level so they were eye to eye, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, you will never be alone again. I promise you that, with all my heart." The gymnasium had been transformed into a magical ballroom, with twinkling lights strung from the ceiling and soft music playing from speakers hidden among paper flowers. Tables covered with pink tablecloths held punch bowls and cookies, and a photographer moved among the crowd, capturing moments that would be treasured forever. As Rick led Emma onto the dance floor, he noticed the other fathers watching them with curiosity, but all he could focus on was the little girl in his arms, swaying to the gentle rhythm of "The Way You Look Tonight." Her small hand rested on his shoulder, and he could feel her heartbeat against his chest. "You're a natural dancer," Rick whispered as they moved together, and Emma beamed with pride. "I practiced in my room last night," Emma confessed. "I put on my dress and danced with my teddy bear. I wanted to be good enough to make you proud." "Emma," Rick said, his voice thick with emotion, "you already make me proud. You are the most amazing, brave, beautiful little girl I've ever known." But as they danced, Rick noticed something that made his blood run cold. Across the room, partially hidden behind a pillar decorated with crepe paper streamers, stood a man in a dark suit watching them intently. The man's face was familiar, and Rick realized with growing dread that his perfect moment was about to be shattered. The stranger in the dark suit moved closer, weaving through the crowd of dancing families with predatory grace. Rick instinctively pulled Emma tighter against him, his business instinct screaming that danger was approaching. There was something about the way the man watched them, patient, calculating, like a spider, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Mr. Rick, you're holding me too tight," Emma whispered, looking up at him with concern. "Are you okay? You look scared." Rick forced himself to relax, but his eyes never left the stranger. "Sorry, sweetheart. I just want to make sure you're safe. There are a lot of people here, and I don't want to lose you." The music swelled around them, a beautiful waltz that should have been the soundtrack to the perfect father-daughter moment. Other couples swayed nearby, lost in their own joy. Rick saw a man teaching his daughter to spin, another father laughing as his little girl stood on his feet to dance. Normal families having normal moments, while Rick's world was about to be turned upside down. "Emma," Rick said softly, trying to keep his voice calm, "I need you to do something for me. If anything happens, if someone tries to talk to you or take you away from me, I want you to run straight to Mrs. Patterson, your teacher. Can you do that?" Emma's eyes widened with alarm. "Are we in trouble? Did I do something wrong?" "No, baby. You're perfect. I just want to make sure you're protected, okay? Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, and I don't want you to get caught in the middle." The stranger began walking directly toward them, and Rick recognized him with a chill that went straight to his bones. Marcus Blackwood, a business rival who'd been trying to destroy Montgomery Industries for years. They'd gone to Harvard together, competed for the same internships, the same opportunities. Marcus had always been jealous of Rick's success, and their rivalry had turned bitter over the years. "Well, well," Marcus said as he reached them, his voice smooth as silk but with an undercurrent of menace that made Rick's skin crawl. Rick Montgomery playing daddy. How absolutely touching. Rick positioned himself between Marcus and Emma, his protective instincts blazing to life. "What do you want, Blackwood? And how did you even know I was here?" "I want what's rightfully mine," Marcus said, his smile cold and calculating. "You see, Rick, I've been watching you for a long time. I know about your company's recent financial troubles, your desperate need for new investors. I know about your late nights at the office, your cancelled vacations, your growing debt. And I know about this little girl." "Leave her out of this," Rick growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Oh, but she's the key to everything," Marcus continued, seeming to enjoy Rick's discomfort. "You see, the adoption agency that handled Emma's case 28 years ago, I own it now. I've been tracking her for years, watching her mother struggle, waiting for the right moment to use her." Emma pressed closer to Rick, sensing the danger even if she didn't understand it. "Mr. Rick, I'm scared. Who is this man?" "It's okay, baby. I won't let anything happen to you." Rick's voice was steady, but inside he was calculating distances, exits, options. Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You can't protect her from the truth, Rick. That little girl isn't just your daughter. She's also my leverage. You see, I've been planning this reunion for years. I knew that if I could bring you and Emma together, I could destroy you both." Rick's hands clenched into fists at his sides as Marcus's words sank in. The beautiful, perfect moment he'd shared with Emma, their first dance, their first real connection as father and daughter, had all been a lie, a carefully orchestrated manipulation designed to destroy him and everyone he cared about. "You're sick," Rick said, his voice low and dangerous. "Using a child, manipulating her emotions, playing with people's lives like they're chess pieces." "I'm a businessman," Marcus replied coolly, straightening his expensive tie. "Just like you. The only difference is that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to win. You always were too sentimental, Rick. That's why you'll never be as successful as me." Emma tugged on Rick's jacket, trying to get his attention, but he was too focused on the threat in front of him to notice. Around them, the dance continued, other families lost in their own joy, while Rick's world crumbled. The music seemed to mock him now, the twinkling lights nothing more than a facade covering the darkness that had invaded his life. "Here's how this is going to work," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a business-like tone. "You're going to sign over 60% of Montgomery Industries to me by midnight tomorrow, or I'll make sure that little girl disappears from your life forever. I have connections, Rick. Judges, social workers, lawyers, people who owe me favors." "You can't do that," Rick said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. He knew Marcus's reputation, knew the man was capable of almost anything. "Can't I? I've been manipulating this situation for years. I arranged for Emma to be placed in that specific school, in that specific class. I made sure Sarah got the job at the diner on 5th Street, where I knew you'd eventually eat lunch. I even had my people suggest that particular park as a place where a lonely little girl might go to cry." Rick felt sick. "You planned all of this?" "Every detail," Marcus said proudly, "from Emma's placement in that school to her presence in the park yesterday. I've been pulling the strings from the beginning. And now I have you exactly where I want you." "But why?" Rick asked. "Why involve an innocent child in your sick games?" "Because I know your weakness, Rick. You're a sucker for lost causes, for people who need saving. I knew that if I could arrange for you to meet your daughter, you'd do anything to protect her. Including destroying everything you've built." That's when Emma stepped forward, her small chin raised defiantly. "You're a bad man," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the gymnasium. "And I know something you don't know." Marcus looked down at her with amusement. "Oh, and what's that, little girl? What's—" Emma smiled, and Rick saw something in her expression that reminded him of himself at his most cunning. I know that you're not as smart as you think you are, because while you were talking and being mean to my daddy, I was recording everything on his phone." Rick looked down in amazement as Emma held up his smartphone, the recording app clearly visible on the screen. When you were holding me tight and looking scared," Emma said proudly. "Mommy taught me about stranger danger, and she showed me how to use phones for emergencies. She said if anyone ever tried to hurt me or threaten me, I should try to record them." Marcus's face went white, then red with rage. "You little brat." "I wouldn't finish that sentence if I were you," Rick said, pulling Emma protectively against him. "Because now I have everything I need to destroy you. Attempted extortion, conspiracy, child endangerment. The FBI is going to love this." But Marcus's expression shifted from anger to a cold, calculating smile that made Rick's blood freeze. "You think you've won? You think one little recording will save you?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This is just the beginning, Rick. That recording won't save you from what's coming next. I have plans within plans, and you've just triggered the nuclear option." As Marcus walked away, disappearing into the crowd of dancing families, Rick looked down at Emma with newfound respect and terror. If Marcus had been planning this for years, what other traps had he set? And more importantly, what was the nuclear option he just mentioned? Emma looked up at him with those bright blue eyes, eyes that now held a wisdom far beyond her years. "Mr. Rick, are we going to be okay? Are you really my daddy?" Rick pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "We're going to be more than okay, sweetheart. We're going to be a family. And I promise you, no one will ever hurt you again." But even as he said the words, Rick couldn't shake the feeling that their battle with Marcus Blackwood was just beginning, and that the worst was yet to come. The next morning, Rick sat in his corner office on the 45th floor of Montgomery Tower, staring out at the city skyline that had once represented everything he'd achieved. Now it felt like a monument to his failures. The glass walls that had once made him feel powerful now seemed fragile, ready to shatter at the first sign of trouble. His legal team worked frantically around him, their voices a constant buzz of strategy and concern that did nothing to calm the storm raging in his mind. The recording Emma had made was playing on repeat through the speakers, and Rick marveled at his daughter's courage. At 6 years old, she'd shown more bravery and quick thinking than most adults he knew. Her small voice filled the room, clear and determined as she captured Marcus's threats, and Rick felt his heart swell with pride, even as it broke with worry. "This is solid evidence," said Jennifer Walsh, his head counsel and longtime friend. She was a sharp woman in her 50s, who'd helped him build his empire from the ground up. "Extortion, conspiracy, child endangerment. We can have him arrested by this afternoon. The DA will love this case." But Rick wasn't celebrating. Something about Marcus's parting words at the school dance gnawed at him like a wound that wouldn't heal. The man had seemed too confident, too prepared for the possibility of being recorded. "Jennifer, I want you to dig deeper. Marcus said this was just the beginning. What else could he have planned? What cards is he still holding?" Jennifer looked up from her legal pad, her expression troubled. "Rick, I've been thinking about that too. Marcus Blackwood doesn't make moves without having 3 backup plans. If he was willing to reveal his hand so easily, it means he's got something bigger waiting." Before she could continue, Rick's secretary burst through the door without knocking, something Margaret had never done in 20 years of working for him. Her face was pale with panic and her usually perfect composure was completely shattered. "Mr. Montgomery, there are federal agents here. They're in the elevator right now. They want to speak with you about financial irregularities in your company." Rick's blood turned to ice. "What kind of irregularities?" "They're saying something about embezzlement, sir. They have warrants. They're searching the building right now." Rick looked at Jennifer, who was already gathering documents and preparing for the worst. "This is it," he said grimly. "This is Marcus's real plan." As if on cue, the door opened and 3 FBI agents entered, their faces stern and professional. They wore the kind of expressions that had ended careers and destroyed lives. The lead agent, a woman with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, stepped forward with the authority of someone who'd done this hundreds of times before. "Mr. Montgomery, I'm Agent Sandra Martinez. We have evidence that you've been systematically stealing money from your company's charitable foundation, specifically funds designated for children's programs. She held up a thick folder filled with documents. We have warrants to search these premises and to place you under arrest. Rick felt the world spinning around him. That's impossible. I've never stolen a penny from the foundation. I've donated millions of my own money to it. We have bank records, transfer documents, and witness statements that tell a different story, Agent Martinez continued, her voice professional but not unkind. The evidence shows that over the past 5 years, you've diverted over $2 million from the Montgomery Foundation into your personal accounts. We also have testimony from employees who say you pressured them to falsify records. This is a setup, Rick said, his voice shaking with rage and disbelief. Marcus Blackwood is behind this. He's trying to destroy me because I wouldn't give him control of my company. He's been planning this for years. Agent Martinez exchanged a look with her colleagues. Sir, we understand this is difficult, but we have to follow the evidence. We'll need you to come with us for questioning. Jennifer stepped forward. I'm Mr. Montgomery's attorney. I'll need to see those warrants and all supporting documentation. As Agent Martinez began reading Rick his rights, his mind raced through the implications. Marcus had planned this perfectly. First, he'd used Emma to get close to Rick. Then, he'd set up this elaborate frame job to destroy him. But what Rick couldn't understand was why Marcus would go to such extremes. What had Rick ever done to deserve this level of calculated hatred? Wait, Rick said suddenly, his voice cutting through the Miranda warning. I need to make a phone call. I have a 6-year-old daughter who's depending on me. If I'm arrested, she'll be left vulnerable. Agent Martinez softened slightly, and Rick saw a flicker of humanity in her professional demeanor. You can call from the station, Mr. Montgomery, but we need to go now. The media has already gotten wind of this, and it's better if we leave quietly. As they led him away in handcuffs, Rick caught a glimpse of Marcus Blackwood standing across the street, watching from the window of a coffee shop they'd frequented as Harvard students. The man was smiling, not the fake practiced smile he used in business meetings, but a genuine expression of satisfaction. Rick realized with growing horror that this was exactly what Marcus had wanted. With Rick in jail, Emma would be completely vulnerable, and Sarah would be forced to turn to the only person who seemed to have any power left, Marcus himself. The handcuffs felt cold against his wrists as they guided him toward the elevator, and Rick understood that his real battle was just beginning. Everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for, was being stripped away piece by piece. But the worst part wasn't losing his company or his freedom. It was knowing that Emma was out there somewhere, believing in him, trusting him to protect her, while he was powerless to do anything but watch his world crumble. Sarah Collins had never felt more terrified in her life. She stood in the kitchen of her tiny apartment, her hands shaking as she poured coffee she wouldn't drink, watching the morning news with a growing sense of dread. The arrest of Rick Montgomery was the lead story on every channel, and the media was treating it like the crime of the century. Prominent businessman Richard Montgomery was arrested this morning on charges of embezzlement and fraud. The perfectly coiffed reporter was saying, her voice carrying the kind of excitement that only came with a major scandal. The FBI alleges that Montgomery stole over $2 million from his own charitable foundation, money that was supposed to help disadvantaged children. If convicted, he could face up to 20 years in prison. Emma sat on the worn couch, still in her school uniform, her eyes wide with confusion as she watched the television. Mommy, they're saying bad things about Daddy. They're showing his picture like he's a bad man, but Daddy isn't bad, is he? Sarah's heart broke at the trust in Emma's voice. This little girl, who had just found her father after 6 years of wandering, was now being told that he was a criminal. No, sweetheart. I don't believe your daddy did those things. I think someone is trying to hurt him. The bad man from the dance. Maybe, baby, maybe. Sarah had spent the night calling lawyers, trying to understand what was happening. But every attorney she'd spoken to had given her the same grim assessment. The evidence against Rick was overwhelming, and whoever had set him up had done it with professional precision. A knock at the door made them both jump. Sarah looked through the peephole and saw a woman in a business suit, accompanied by 2 police officers. The woman was middle-aged with kind eyes, But the official documents in her hands made Sarah's worst fears come true. "Ms. Collins, I'm Margaret Henderson from Child Protective Services. I have an emergency court order regarding Emma Montgomery Collins." Sarah opened the door with trembling fingers. "What kind of court order?" "Given Mr. Montgomery's arrest and the serious nature of the charges against him, the court has determined that it's in Emma's best interest to be placed in protective custody until this matter is resolved." Margaret's voice was professional but sympathetic. "I understand this is difficult, but we have to think about what's best for Emma." "No," Sarah said firmly, stepping protectively in front of her daughter. "Emma is my daughter. I have full custody. Rick isn't even on her birth certificate. He has no legal rights to her. Actually, ma'am, we have evidence that Mr. Montgomery has been attempting to claim paternal rights, and given his current legal troubles, the court feels that Emma may be at risk. We also have reports that you've been allowing an accused felon to have unsupervised access to your child." Sarah realized with growing horror that this was all part of Marcus's plan. He'd orchestrated Rick's arrest, and now he was using it to separate Emma from both of her parents. This is insane. Rick would never hurt Emma. He loves her more than his own life. "Ma'am, I understand this is difficult, but the court has made its decision. We have testimony from witnesses who say that Mr. Montgomery has been exhibiting erratic behavior, that he's been making grandiose claims about being Emma's father, and that he may be using her as part of some elaborate scheme." Margaret pulled out a thick folder. "We also have evidence that you've been financially dependent on Mr. Montgomery, that he's been giving you money and gifts. The court is concerned that you may have been complicit in his activities." Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "That's not true. Rick never gave me money. He only offered to help with Emma's school expenses, and I turned him down." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we have bank records that show otherwise. Now I need you to pack a bag for Emma. She'll be staying with a foster family until the courts can sort this out." Emma began to cry, clinging to Sarah's leg with desperate strength. "I don't want to go with strangers, Mummy. I want to stay with you and Daddy. Why are they taking me away?" Sarah knelt down and pulled Emma into her arms, breathing in the scent of her daughter's hair and memorizing the feel of her small body. "Listen to me, sweetheart. This is all a big mistake. Mommy is going to fight for you, okay? This is just temporary. I'm going to get Daddy out of jail and we're going to be a family again. You promise?" "I promise," Sarah said, though she had no idea how she was going to keep that promise. "But I need you to be brave for me. Can you do that? Can you be as brave as you were at the dance?" Emma nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I'll be brave, Mommy. But you have to promise to come get me soon." "I promise, baby, I promise." As they led Emma away, the little girl turned back to Sarah with tears streaming down her face. "Tell Daddy I love him, Mommy. Tell him I know he's not bad. Tell him I'm going to be brave until he can come save me." Sarah watched through the window as they put Emma in the back of a government car, her small face pressed against the glass, mouthing, "I love you," over and over again. Something inside Sarah snapped as the car pulled away. Marcus Blackwood had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd messed with the wrong mother, and now she was going to show him what a woman could do when she was fighting for her child. The county jail was a stark, unforgiving place that smelled of disinfectant and desperation. The walls were painted an institutional green that seemed designed to drain hope from anyone who looked at them. Rick sat in the visitor's room, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made him feel like a criminal. His hands clasped tightly on the metal table to keep them from shaking. When Sarah finally appeared, escorted by a guard who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, Rick felt his heart clench. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, but her jaw was set with a determination he remembered from their college days. She'd always been a fighter, even when the odds were stacked against her. "They took her," Sarah said without preamble, her voice raw with emotion. "Child Protective Services came to my apartment this morning with a court order. They said Emma was at risk because of your arrest." Rick felt like someone had punched him in the chest. "Where is she now?" "Foster care. They wouldn't even tell me which family. They said it was for her protection." Sarah's voice cracked, and Rick saw the mother's anguish she was trying so hard to hide. "Rick, she was so scared. She kept asking for you, kept saying you weren't bad. She tried to be brave, but she's just a little girl. This is all my fault, Rick said, his voice hollow with self-recrimination. I should have seen this coming. I should have protected her. I should have protected both of you. No, Sarah said firmly, leaning forward. This is Marcus's fault. He's the one who's been pulling the strings, manipulating all of us. You couldn't have known how far he was willing to go. Rick looked at her across the table, seeing the woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Despite everything that had happened, despite the pain and separation, she was still the strongest person he'd ever known. Sarah, I'm so sorry. If I hadn't walked into that park, if I hadn't gotten involved in Emma's life, none of this would have happened. Don't you dare apologize for loving our daughter, Sarah said, her voice fierce. Emma needed you, Rick. She's needed you her whole life. What happened isn't your fault, it's Marcus's. And we're going to make him pay for what he's done. How? Rick asked, gesturing around the sterile room. I'm in jail, probably for years. They have evidence, witnesses, documentation. Marcus has thought of everything. Then we have to think of something he hasn't thought of, Sarah said. We have to find a way to outsmart him. What do you know about him that we can use? Rick closed his eyes, trying to recall everything he knew about Marcus Blackwood. We went to Harvard together. We were both in the business program, both ambitious, both determined to succeed. But Marcus, he was different. He was ruthless in ways that even I couldn't understand. What do you mean? He would do anything to win. I remember once we were competing for the same internship at Goldman Sachs. The night before the final interview, Marcus somehow got hold of my presentation and submitted it as his own. When I confronted him, he just smiled and said, "Business is war, and in war there are no rules." Sarah's eyes narrowed. He's been using that philosophy his whole life. Rick, there's something I never told you. After you left for London, Marcus came to see me. He knew I was pregnant and he offered to help me. He said he could take care of everything, that he'd marry me and raise the baby as his own. What did you tell him? I told him no. I said I'd rather struggle alone than be with someone I didn't love. He didn't take it well. He said I'd regret it, that I'd come crawling back to him someday. Sarah's voice grew quiet. He said he'd wait for me, no matter how long it took. Rick felt the pieces clicking into place. This isn't about business revenge, this is about you. He's still obsessed with you, and Emma represents everything he couldn't have, our love, our child, our life together. Then we use that against him, Sarah said, her voice taking on a calculating tone that reminded Rick of the brilliant woman who'd graduated summa cum laude. If he wants me, maybe we can negotiate, maybe we can make a deal. Absolutely not, Rick said firmly, his protective instincts blazing to life. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for us. There has to be another way. Sarah smiled sadly, and Rick saw the same expression she'd worn when she'd made the decision to give Emma up for adoption years ago. Rick, I gave up Emma once to protect her. I'm not making that mistake again. If I have to face Marcus to get her back, I will. A mother will do anything to protect her child. Sarah, listen to me. No, you listen to me, Sarah interrupted. We're going to get Emma back, and we're going to clear your name, but we're going to do it together. We're going to be the family we should have been 28 years ago. As visiting hours ended, and they were forced to part, Rick realized that their fight was just beginning. But for the first time since his arrest, he felt something he hadn't felt in days. Hope. Because now he and Sarah were fighting together, united by their love for Emma and their determination to protect her. And their love for each other, the love that had never really died, was stronger than Marcus's hatred. 3 days later, Sarah sat across from Marcus Blackwood in his palatial office, fighting to keep her composure as she took in the obscene display of wealth and power that surrounded her. The office was a monument to ego, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, expensive art that probably cost more than most people's houses, and a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of mahogany by master craftsmen. The building itself was a testament to Marcus's success. Blackwood Industries occupied 3 floors of one of the city's most prestigious towers, and Sarah had felt intimidated from the moment she'd stepped into the marble lobby. Security guards in expensive suits had escorted her to the executive elevator, and she'd felt their eyes on her the entire way up. "You look beautiful, Sarah," Marcus said, his voice smooth as silk as he poured himself a glass of what looked like very expensive scotch. "The years have been kind to you. You're even more stunning than you were in college." Sarah fought the urge to shudder at the way he looked at her, like a predator studying his prey. "Where is Emma?" she asked, cutting straight to the point. "I know you're behind all of this. The arrest, the custody order, it all has your fingerprints on it." Marcus smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "Straight to business. I always admired that about you, Sarah. No games, no pretense. Very well, Emma is safe, I assure you. She's with a lovely family, coincidentally friends of mine who owe me several favors." "What do you want?" "The same thing I've always wanted," Marcus said, rising from his chair and walking to the window. Outside, the city sprawled below them, millions of people living their lives, unaware of the drama playing out in this glass tower. "You. I've spent 28 years building my empire, accumulating power and wealth, all in the hope that someday you'd realize what a mistake you made choosing Rick over me." Sarah's stomach turned. "You're insane. You destroyed Rick's life, terrified my daughter, all because of some twisted obsession." "Love," Marcus corrected, turning back to her. "I call it love, and it's about to pay off. You see, Sarah, I've been very patient. I've watched you struggle, watched you work multiple jobs, watched you sacrifice everything for that little girl, and I've been waiting for the right moment to step in and save you." "Save me from what?" "From poverty, from struggle, from the mistakes you made in your youth." Marcus walked back to his desk and pulled out a folder. "I know everything about you, Sarah. Your credit score, your bank balance, your employment history. I know you've been living paycheck to paycheck, that you've been putting off medical checkups because you can't afford them, that you've been buying Emma's clothes at thrift stores." Sarah's face burned with shame and anger. "How dare you?" "I dare because I care," Marcus interrupted, "because I can change all of that. Here's the deal. Marry me and I'll make all of Rick's legal troubles disappear. Emma will be returned to you and the three of us will be a happy family. I'll adopt Emma legally, give her my name, send her to the best schools money can buy. I'd rather die." Marcus's expression darkened, and for a moment Sarah saw the true man beneath the polished exterior. "That can be arranged. But think about Emma, Sarah. Think about what's best for her. I can give her everything. The best schools, the finest clothes, tutors, music lessons, dance classes. A life of luxury and opportunity. What can you offer her?" "A tiny apartment and a mother who works 3 jobs just to pay the rent." "I can offer her love," Sarah said firmly, "something you'll never understand." "Love doesn't pay for college tuition or medical bills," Marcus replied coldly. "Love doesn't protect her from the cruel realities of the world, but my money does. And if you refuse my generous offer, I'll make sure that both you and Rick spend the rest of your lives in prison." Sarah felt her heart sink. "You're lying." "Am I? I have evidence that you were an accessory to Rick's embezzlement. I have witnesses who will testify that you knew about his illegal activities, that you benefited from them. I have bank records showing mysterious deposits into your account, deposits that came from Rick's stolen money." "That's impossible. Rick never gave me money." "Didn't he? Check your bank account, Sarah. You'll find several deposits over the past month. Money that came from the Montgomery Foundation. Money that was supposed to help disadvantaged children." Sarah's mind raced. She hadn't checked her account in days. But if Marcus was telling the truth, "You planted evidence." "I created evidence," Marcus corrected. "I have judges, prosecutors, and police officers on my payroll. I can make the evidence say whatever I want it to say." That's when Sarah heard a sound that made her blood run cold, a little girl's laughter coming from another room. It was Emma's laugh, unmistakable and heartbreaking. "Emma!" she whispered. Marcus smiled triumphantly. "She's here, Sarah. She's been here all along, playing in my game room, eating ice cream, watching cartoons on a television bigger than your entire living room. She thinks she's on a fun adventure." "You kidnapped her?" "I rescued her from the foster care system," Marcus said, pressing a button on his desk. A wall panel slid open, revealing a hidden room filled with toys, games, and every luxury a child could want. And there, in the center of it all, sat Emma, playing with a dollhouse that probably cost more than Sarah's car. "She's been here the whole time," Sarah whispered, her voice broken. Safe, happy, and well cared for, Marcus said. She asks about you constantly, of course. She misses you terribly. But she's adapting. Children are remarkably resilient. You're a monster. I'm a man who gets what he wants, Marcus replied. And I want you, Sarah. I've always wanted you. I've spent 28 years planning this moment, and I'm not going to let you slip away again. Marcus walked to his desk and pulled out a contract. Marry me and Emma stays safe. Refuse and I'll make sure you never see her again. I have connections in family court, Sarah. I can have her placed in a home on the other side of the country with a family who will never let you contact her. But as Marcus delivered his ultimatum, neither of them noticed the small figure hiding behind the door, listening to every word. Emma had heard everything, and the brave little girl who had once recorded a bad man's threats was about to prove that she was more resourceful than anyone had ever imagined. Emma Montgomery had learned a lot about grown-ups in the past week. She'd learned that they could lie with smiles on their faces, that they could hurt people they were supposed to love, and that sometimes the adults who were supposed to protect children were the ones who needed protecting from other adults. But she'd also learned something else about herself. She was much braver and smarter than anyone had ever given her credit for. For 3 days, she'd been staying at Marcus's mansion, and while he'd been kind to her, giving her expensive toys, gourmet meals, and a bedroom that looked like something from a fairy tale, she'd sensed something fundamentally wrong. The way he talked about her mommy when he thought she wasn't listening, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, the whispered phone calls he made when he thought she was asleep. The mansion itself was like a prison disguised as a palace. Every door was locked, every window had security sensors, and the staff, while friendly, watched her constantly. Emma had tried to call her mother several times, but the phones were all programmed to block outgoing calls. She'd asked about going home, but Marcus always had excuses. Your mommy is busy with work, or we need to wait for the lawyers to finish their paperwork. But Emma was her father's daughter, and she'd inherited his ability to see through lies and manipulation. She'd been watching, listening, and planning. And now, hiding behind the door of Marcus's office, she'd heard everything she needed to know. Marcus had taken her away from her parents on purpose. He'd hurt her daddy by lying to the police, and now he was trying to force her mommy to marry him. Emma was only 6 years old, but she understood that this was very, very wrong. As Sarah and Marcus continued their conversation, Emma crept back to the game room where she'd been staying. Marcus had given her an iPad to keep her entertained, and she'd been playing games and watching videos. But Emma had also been secretly exploring the device, and she'd discovered something important. It wasn't just connected to the house's Wi-Fi. It had cellular service too. With the determination of a child who'd learned to survive in difficult circumstances, Emma opened the video recording app and began to record. She knew she had to be very quiet, very careful, but she also knew she had to help her parents. My name is Emma Montgomery, she whispered to the camera, her voice steady despite her fear. I'm 6 years old, and I'm trapped in a bad man's house. The bad man is Marcus Blackwood, and he took me away from my mommy and daddy. He hurt my daddy by lying to the police, and now he's trying to make my mommy marry him by threatening to hurt me. She paused, thinking about everything she'd overheard. Mr. Marcus thinks I'm just a little kid who doesn't understand what's happening. But I do understand. I understand that he's a very bad man who hurts people to get what he wants, and I understand that I have to help stop him. Emma then did something that would have made her father proud. She started gathering evidence. She used the iPad to take pictures of documents on Marcus's desk, to record conversations through the walls, to document everything she could about her imprisonment. She was methodical and careful, just like she'd seen her daddy be when he was working. But her most important discovery came when she found Marcus's private study. Emma had been exploring the mansion while everyone thought she was napping, and she discovered that the study door was hidden behind a bookshelf. Inside, the room was filled with files, photographs, and documents that painted a picture of a man who'd been obsessed with her mother for nearly 3 decades. The walls were covered with photos of Sarah from college, some of them clearly taken without her knowledge. There were copies of letters Rick had sent to Sarah years ago that had been intercepted, detailed timelines of Sarah's life, and even photos of Emma herself from when she was a baby. In the center of it all was a thick folder labeled Project Sarah. Inside were blueprints for everything that had happened: Emma's placement in specific schools, Sarah's job placements, even detailed plans for Rick's arrest. There were psychological profiles, financial records, and what looked like a 20-year plan for destroying Rick's life and winning Sarah back. Emma photographed everything, her small hands steady despite her fear. She was creating a record that would prove Marcus's guilt beyond any doubt. But she was also discovering just how dangerous Marcus really was. There were files on other people who had stood in his way, and Emma saw references to accidents and disappearances that made her stomach turn. One document in particular caught her attention, a plan titled Final Phase. It outlined Marcus's intentions to not only force Sarah to marry him, but to eventually eliminate Rick permanently. Emma couldn't understand all the big words, but she understood enough to know that her daddy was in terrible danger. But as she finished photographing the last document, she heard footsteps approaching. Marcus was coming, and if he found her in his study, she didn't know what he might do. Emma quickly put everything back where she'd found it and ran back to the game room, her heart pounding. She had the evidence she needed, but now she had to figure out how to get it to the people who could help her parents. That's when she remembered something her teacher had taught them about internet safety and emergencies. Mrs. Patterson had shown them how to contact the authorities if they were ever in trouble and couldn't call 911. Emma had never sent an email before, but she was a smart little girl and she was determined to save her family. As Marcus entered the game room, smiling his fake smile and asking if she wanted ice cream for dinner, Emma was already composing her message in her head. She would wait until he was asleep, and then she would send the email that would change everything. Because Emma Montgomery was her father's daughter, and she'd inherited his courage, his intelligence, and his refusal to give up when the people he loved were in danger. The bad man had underestimated her, and now he was going to learn that the smallest person in the room could sometimes be the most dangerous. Emma smiled sweetly at Marcus and told him she'd love some ice cream, all while planning the move that would bring down his entire house of cards. At 2:47 a.m., Emma Montgomery sat in the darkness of her luxurious prison, the iPad glowing softly in her small hands. The mansion was silent, except for the hum of expensive security systems and the distant sound of Marcus's snoring from his bedroom down the hall. Emma had waited hours for this moment, fighting sleep and fear, knowing that her family's future depended on what she did next. Her fingers moved carefully across the screen as she composed the most important message of her young life. Dear FBI, my name is Emma Montgomery, and I am 6 years old. A bad man named Marcus Blackwood kidnapped me and is trying to hurt my mommy and daddy. I have pictures and videos that prove he is lying about everything. Please help us. She attached every photo, every recording, every piece of evidence she'd gathered over the past 3 days. The file was massive, dozens of documents, hours of secretly recorded conversations, and the damning contents of Marcus's Project Sarah folder. As she hit send, Emma whispered a prayer she'd learned from her mother. Please let someone believe me. What Emma didn't know was that her email had been forwarded to Agent Sandra Martinez, the same agent who had arrested her father. Martinez had been working late, haunted by doubts about the Montgomery case that had kept her awake for nights. When she opened Emma's email at 3:15 a.m., her blood ran cold. By dawn, federal agents surrounded Marcus's mansion. The evidence Emma had provided was overwhelming, not just proof of Marcus's current crimes, but a digital trail going back 28 years. Financial records showed he'd been systematically destroying Rick's business competitors, planting evidence, and bribing officials. Most shocking of all was a recorded conversation where Marcus admitted to murdering his own business partner 15 years earlier, a death that had been ruled an accident. Rick was released from jail at 7:23 a.m. The charges against him officially dropped. Sarah was waiting for him outside the courthouse, and when they embraced, 28 years of separation melted away in an instant. "Emma?" was the first word Rick spoke. "Safe," Sarah whispered through her tears. "Our brave little girl saved us all." They raced to Marcus's mansion, arriving just as FBI agents were bringing him out in handcuffs. Marcus's face was twisted with rage, but when he saw Sarah and Rick together, something broken and desperate flickered in his eyes. "You don't understand," he called out desperately. "I did this for you, Sarah. I loved you. I've always loved you." That's when Sarah walked directly up to him, her voice steady and clear. "Marcus, you never loved me. You loved the idea of winning something you couldn't have. But love doesn't destroy people. Love doesn't hurt children. Love doesn't manipulate and lie and steal. I could have given you everything," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "You couldn't give me the one thing that mattered," Sarah replied. "You couldn't give me a man who would put his family before his own ego. You couldn't give me someone who would sacrifice everything to protect the people he loved. You couldn't give me Rick." As they led Marcus away, Emma appeared in the doorway, running toward her parents with arms outstretched. Rick swept her up, spinning her around while Sarah wrapped her arms around both of them. "I knew you'd come," Emma said, her voice muffled against Rick's shoulder. "I knew you'd save me." "You saved us, sweetheart," Rick said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved all of us." But the most shocking revelation came later, when FBI agents finished processing Marcus's files. Hidden in his deepest records was a document that changed everything they thought they knew about the past 28 years. "There's something else," Agent Martinez told them as they sat in a small conference room. "Marcus didn't just intercept your letters to Sarah when you were in London, Rick. He actually received them and responded to them, pretending to be Sarah." Rick's face went pale. "What do you mean?" "We found copies of letters he sent to you, forged with Sarah's signature. Letters telling you to stay away, that she'd moved on, that she never wanted to see you again. He convinced you that Sarah had rejected you, just like he convinced Sarah that you had abandoned her." Sarah grabbed Rick's hand. "You tried to come back to me." "Every day," Rick whispered. "I wrote to you for 2 years. When I finally got those letters saying you hated me, it broke my heart, but they weren't from you. And Sarah," Agent Martinez continued, "Marcus made sure you never received any of Rick's letters. He had contacts at the Postal Service who intercepted them. You both spent 28 years thinking the other had abandoned you, when in reality you were both trying to find each other." As the truth sank in, Rick and Sarah realized that they'd lost nearly 3 decades together because of one man's obsession. But they'd also gained something precious, a second chance, and a daughter who had proven that love could overcome any obstacle. 3 months later, Rick and Sarah stood in the same park where they'd first found each other again, watching Emma play on the swings. The custody hearing had been a formality. DNA tests confirmed Rick's paternity, and Emma's own testimony about wanting to be with both her parents had moved the judge to tears. "Do you think we can really do this?" Sarah asked, her hand in Rick's. "After everything that's happened, after all the years we lost?" Rick pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "I think we've already proven that our love can survive anything, and look at what we created together." They watched Emma, now confident and happy, teaching another lonely child how to use the monkey bars. Their daughter had learned that the world could be cruel, but also that courage and love could triumph over evil. "We're going to be okay," Rick said softly. "We're going to be better than okay. We're going to be the family we were always meant to be." As the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the Montgomery family walked home together, their hands intertwined, their hearts full of hope for the future. They'd learned that sometimes the most beautiful endings come from the most painful beginnings, and that love, real, true, sacrificial love, was worth fighting for, no matter how long it took to find your way back to each other. Emma skipped ahead of them, turning back to wave, her face bright with joy. "Come on, Mommy and Daddy, let's go home." Home. After 28 years of searching, they'd finally found their way back to each other, and nothing would ever separate them again.